If you're having trouble being consistent with implementing good habits in your life, this video is for you. Because when I work with my clients, the first question is not usually about what kind of habits we want to implement into our life, but why we want to implement certain habits into our life. Because only if you really understood why something is good for you, it will become so much easier to actually implement it and to also be consistent over a longer period of time. The truth is that most people start habits not because they know what's good for them, but just because they got influenced by someone else. And if you don't have a deeper understanding and a deeper connection to a habit, you will have such a hard time being consistent over a longer period of time. And to understand why certain habits are good for us and what habits are actually good for us, we will go back to the very roots and understand how the past 200,000 to 300,000 of years have shaped our bodies, minds, emotional systems, and metabolism, and how the modern society has basically screwed everything over. So if you're having trouble with implementing good habits into your life, watch this video till the end, because we will have a much deeper understanding on human history, how our bodies are shaped, and what habits come actually natural to us and what we should implement in our life. And I promise you that you will be more consistent after understanding this. My name is Simon and I'm an accountability partner. And what that means is that my goal is basically to make you reach your goals. And I do that on a daily basis by holding people accountable, because I believe that consistency matters, but accountability is actually what gets you there. I have already helped a lot of people defining and reaching their goals. And if you're having trouble with making consistent progress towards your goal, book a free discovery call by clicking the link in the description below. Also, if you're new here, subscribe to my YouTube channel, because here's where I upload weekly videos about systems and tricks on how you can be more consistent with reaching your goals. But now that this is out of the way, let's dive straight into the video. And the first thing that I want to do is actually to share some context about human history, because it is very, very important to understand where we're actually coming from in order to understand in what kind of situation we are currently in. And I won't go into the very details of things, but the most important thing to understand is that the Homo sapiens, or the modern human, has been around for over 200,000 to 300,000 of years already. And crucially, 99% of those 200,000 to 300,000 of years, our ancestors have lived as hunters and gatherers, which means that our body, our mind, our brain, our emotional system, and our metabolism has been shaped in this era. And that part is super important to understand. We have been living for 300,000 of years as hunters and gatherers. And after this insanely long time span, after having lived as hunters and gatherers for hundreds of thousands of years, only 10,000 years ago, the first revolution, the agricultural revolution, happened, which basically meant that all of a sudden we started to settle down, which drastically changed our entire lifestyle. And then only 200 years ago, the second meaningful revolution happened, which was the Industrial Revolution. So again, a lot of things started changing. Things accelerated, new technology was implemented, and the whole entire population had to adapt again. After the Industrial Revolution, just only 3 years ago, the next revolution, the Digital Revolution, happened. And again, you guessed it, the entire world changed and the population had to adapt again. All of a sudden, the whole globe was connected, people were starting to look at screens, and our brains, bodies, and emotional systems again had to adapt. And to make that picture even more clear, we can condense the entire history of the Homo sapiens into 24 hours. And if we would do that, it would look the following. Because if we would boil down the last 300,000 of years into a time span of only 24 hours, we would have been hunters and gatherers until 11:55 p.m. Then the agricultural revolution happened and we started farming at 11:56 p.m. The first machines got introduced with the Industrial Revolution, and that was 11:59 p.m. And even more mind-blowing is that the smartphones that we're so attached to in the recent years has only been developed 5 seconds ago in that picture. So the main point that I want to get across is that we have been basically living as hunters and gatherers for the entirety of human history. And that's where it becomes so obvious that our bodies, our brains, and our hormones has been shaped by an environment that hasn't changed for hundreds of thousands of years. And that of course has huge implications on us and the habits that we need to build in our life. And the kicker to the entire scenario is of course that the past 100 to 200 years have moved so much faster than our bodies were able to adapt. To put it in a nutshell, we have basically accelerated our environment so much that the evolution of our bodies, brains, and hormones has not been able to keep up. And that is basically the answer to why good habits are important. Because good habits like having a morning routine or doing daily exercise or doing digital detox is not just a wellness trend or an optional thing to have, it has basically been engraved into our DNA. I'm sorry, I just had to switch locations because the other one was closing down, but we can just simply continue. What I wanted to say is that technology, abundance, and comfort evolved exponentially, but our biology hasn't been able to adapt and grow exponentially and is still ancient. And what that means is that if we zoom out and we look at the bigger picture, you could pretty much say that we're almost cavemen and cavewomen living in a hyper-stimulated, dopamine-driven and convenience-obsessed world. And because most people are ignoring that fact and they are also ignoring their biology, we have record-breaking levels of depression, burnout, chronic stress, back pain, and so on. And this is why we have to go back to the habits that actually satisfy our inner Neanderthal in order to rebalance, be calm and happy. Now that we understood the context that we're moving in, we can look at 3 habits that basically derive from hundreds of thousands of years of evolution that we need to allow into our life in order to rebalance, regain focus and maintain energy. The first daily habit that I want to talk about is also the most obvious one, and that is daily physical exercise. And of course, most of us know that daily physical exercise is something that is beneficial to us. However, what I think is crucial to understand is exactly why that is. And if we take a closer look at our ancestors, the answer to that becomes very, very obvious. And of course, as a caveman or a cavewoman, you were not able to just simply go to the gym and lift some heavy weights. It was more that daily exercise was actually necessary in order to survive on a daily basis. Because in order to survive, people needed to exercise. And exercise back then meant to hunt, build, gather, carry water, crawl, squat, and so on a daily basis. And historians actually suggest that the ancient Homo sapiens was walking around 10 to 15 kilometers a day. And even back then when they were resting, they were not actually falling on a couch and scrolling on TikTok. Everything that they do, even when they were resting, there was some level of physical exercise involved. And of course today everything looks massively different. Because now we spend most of our time sitting in an office chair, and maybe if we're lucky we get into the gym into the evening, but that is also in the most cases only if we force ourselves to do it. And the good news actually is that our DNA is not screaming for hard, intense workouts. We just have to find a habit that embeds movement into our lifestyle. One of those habits is a very popular one, and that is the 10,000 steps a day challenge, where you just start walking everywhere, and that is a great habit if you have the time for that. If not, there is also the no elevator rule, which is also very self-explanatory. Standing at your working desk instead of sitting there is actually another great habit that people started to implement, and you can get very creative with that. But the underlying idea is that our history suggests that we don't actually need to have a hard workout in the gym if we don't really feel for it, but that we just have to be consistent with allowing movement into every part of our life. A second great habit that you should actually try to integrate into your life based on our history is intermittent fasting. And maybe you've already heard about the benefits of fasting, but it's basically improved gut health, boosted focus, and reduced inflammation. However, of course, it's still very hard to implement this habit long-termly and being consistent with it, because especially in the beginning, you will feel very, very hungry. But now if we peel back the layers of history and we actually take a look at why fasting is good for our bodies, everything starts making so much more sense. And once you have a deeper understanding of why a habit is good for you, it's so much easier to be consistent with it as well. And the reason why fasting is a good habit to implement is because our ancestors usually didn't have food around when they were feeling hungry. And that basically means that for hundreds of thousands of years, our ancestors were either hungry or satisfied, nothing in between. They always went from fasting to feasting, and there was never a snack in between. And our bodies evolved like this over such a long period of time that when we live in abundance, we are completely overwhelmed. Because today food is everywhere, and sometimes we even eat out of boredom and not out of appetite, which means that our insulin levels never get a break and our energy constantly crashes. And that is all simply because our bodies are not used to this abundance. And in fact, we should actually go back and imitate what our ancestors were doing in order to rebalance our gut system. And this is where fasting comes in as a very effective tool. And it's so obvious that we actually don't need to eat all the time, but that we should actually give our body some time in order to repair and digest. And what you're doing if you're doing intermittent fasting and you're allowing yourself a feeding window of, let's say, 8 hours, and for the other 16 hours of a day you're actually not eating, you're basically imitating the rhythm of your metabolism that has been shaped over hundreds of thousands of years. Now that you know that fasting is not a new tool in order to make you feel better or something that you should maybe give a try, but we are basically only going back to what we're meant to do, and we are imitating what our bodies are used to, implementing such a habit should come much more natural to you. Now the third and last habit that we should implement based on our history is actually to practice daily stillness. And I guess you can already already imagine where this is going, because our ancestors, when they were hunters and gatherers or when they were hunting, they sometimes had to sit in silence, totally alert and waiting for multiple hours. And that way silence actually became part of the process instead of something that you should avoid. And if you compare that to today, can you still imagine to sit still for multiple hours while being laser focused on one single thing? I don't think anybody in our modern society, except for maybe some monks who are great at meditation, can actually achieve something like that. Because nowadays most people have struggled to avoid silence for 10 seconds without reaching for their smartphone. And I was guilty of that as well, because every time I was waiting for the elevator or just standing in the supermarket queue and there was no input for my brain, I would just whip out my phone and search for the next dopamine hit. Which basically means that we completely lost our ability to focus on something and to pay attention for only one thing for a prolonged period of time. And now you can only imagine what such an information overflow is doing to your brain. Because again, our brains have evolved over hundreds of thousands of years in order to be able to focus on one thing for a prolonged period of time. And now we're drowning in an information overflow. And therefore we have to go back to this ability, because silence is not empty, but it's the time where your brain resets, you're connecting the dots and you actually find meaning in the thoughts that you're having. And if you never give your brain a pause and stop consuming, you will never actually understand, because you're never in a reflecting mode. And now that we understood that, maybe the habit of spending 10 minutes in total silence will have so much more meaning to us. And when you implement that habit, you will actually feel like how hard it is to sit still in the first couple days, but you will also feel a drastic increase in your thought clarity. It will reset your dopamine systems, strengthen your focus and reconnect you with your own thoughts. And remember that we're not implementing anything new here. We're just basically going back to the roots of what our body and our mind and our brain is actually used to and what we crave inside without even knowing, in order to rebalance our life. So there you go. I really hope that the added context helps you to be more consistent with the habits that you're trying to implement, because of course it doesn't stop at the 3 habits that I talked about in this video, because there are so many more habits that we should actually go back to in order to rebalance our body and our mind. Let me know in the comments what kind of habits you're implementing and why they're working for you, and also how you're able to stay consistent with them over a longer period of time. I'm very curious to hear about it. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to my channel, and see you in the next video.